Thank you for tuning in to Headliner News. I'm Scott Davis. By now, most of you have heard about the Supreme Court decision, what many media outlets is describing as Trump got off scot-free by the Supreme Court. That is not exactly the case, and we'll explore that later on in the show. But I want to start off by covering an issue which I find to be remarkable, and that is the criticism of the Trump campaign's response to the Supreme Court decision. Many media pundits are accusing the former president of spiking the ball in response to the Supreme Court decision and taking advantage of the criminal charge for the purpose of politics.
We have seen former President Trump try to capitalize on these cases that Laura is talking about, including the one that we just got from the Supreme Court. And he has vowed to pardon some of those who rioted, who have been charged, who've pleaded guilty to their actions on January 6th. He's trying to energize his base of supporters with that type of language. We saw that last night at the debate.
You may find it somewhat shameful or distasteful, but what the Trump campaign is doing is no different than what other political parties have done. I mean, keep in mind the number of Democrats that were using impeachment as a way to raise funds, or even some of the fundraising that came about on both sides of the aisle after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. So I don't find it significant that the Trump campaign is doing this. I do think it's somewhat premature, though, because the actual Supreme Court decision did not state that Mr. Trump or former presidents have absolute immunity when it came to everything. Let's take a deeper look at what the Supreme Court decision actually stated.
Explicit about this, it lays out its framework by saying, quote, "The nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority." What the court is saying in this part is quite surprising. They're basically saying that nothing he does in terms of pressuring the Justice Department to investigate whoever he wants to investigate as president can ever be subject to criminal liability.
So when we look at the actual decision, the sort of sky is falling approach that some of the media pundits are having about this decision, we know simply is not true. The court identified that the immunity and or presumptive immunities apply to official acts of the president. So that means that no, Donald Trump can't just get in his car and hit people and give them the bird and not worry about being prosecuted, or go back to his infamous quote that he said during his first campaign, he could shoot somebody in Times Square and get away with it. Actually, he couldn't. And I'm pretty sure the Manhattan County DA or the state attorney for New York would actually prosecute him on that. So let's take some areas where the court actually made it clear what they were addressing in terms of some of the limitations. Let's take a look at the screen. You'll see the actual full language of the Supreme Court decision. You'll see that the court determined that there is no immunity when it comes to his unofficial acts. What the court is basically saying is that it's the responsibility of the lower court and the prosecutor to determine what was an official act of the president, which will have immunity, and what are they identifying as either a potential presumptive or an area where he was not acting in his official capacity, where he should be prosecuted. Now, many people will say this is not fair. Why should Donald Trump enjoy issues of immunity? Well, this is not about Donald Trump. This is about our Constitution. This is about Article 2 of the Constitution in particular, which deals with the power of the presidency. And that's any president, whether it's the ones that you like or the ones that you don't like. Whether we go as far back as Nixon or we talk about Joe Biden today, those immunities are put in place for a reason, so that executives can make decisions without fear of litigation or prosecution. And by the way, executive immunity is not something limited to the office of the president. Go look at your state constitution and your local city charter. Your mayor and your governor probably enjoy some degree of immunity. That's because it's clearly understood and identified by legal scholars and legislatures throughout time that in order to effectively execute the duties of office, you actually have to have some degree of immunity. Now, I think, like some other people, that it is early for Donald Trump to spike the ball. Remember that in many of the cases facing the former president, there are multiple charges. So let's say if he's lucky and say 60% of the charges relating to January 6th are thrown out, he still have the other 40 to deal with. The other challenge is that this court case, as many people have said before, is going to most likely take place after the election. But to me, that's a no-brainer, nor is it really relevant. At this point, you have a clear-cut choice. You have one candidate, which people have criticized his age and people are trying to push him to step out. And you have another candidate that has multiple federal indictments and multiple federal charges against him. Legally can be identified as a convicted felon at this point. So to me, it's an excuse to blame the Supreme Court because you do have a responsibility as a voter. And by the way, it's been about, 50 years since Mr. Nixon's impeachment, and we still don't have laws limiting the powers of the president. We still don't have laws guaranteeing women the right to abortion. So I think Congress has a responsibility for a lot of the problems that were had or what people experienced during the Trump administration. But ultimately, in our republic, which many people like to call a democracy, the responsibility falls down to the voters. If you are okay voting for somebody who has multiple indictments and you don't believe that they're relevant, then you have your choice. If you are someone who is bothered by a potential commander-in-chief having felons, then you also have a choice. So I don't think we should follow the approach of Chicken Little, the sky is falling. It's not. The power, like the little girl in The Wizard of Oz, is in your hand. Just click your shoes and make a vote. This has been Headliner News. I'm Scott Davis. Thank you for watching.